All right, so we have set out on a quest to go through the book of Daniel, and we actually have gone through the first 2 chapters. And just by way of reviewing what we have looked at already, we have seen that Daniel was taken to Babylon as a captive, and while he was in Babylon, he was given the gift of understanding dreams and visions. What we saw was that God gave a vision to King Nebuchadnezzar in which he outlined the entire history of the world in terms of the political history of the world from the time of Babylon until the end of time is outlined there in Daniel chapter 2. And one of the things that we said is that Daniel chapter 2, that vision of Daniel chapter 2, is the template that we use in understanding all the end time prophecies. Daniel chapter 2 gives us a template. Now, we also made a point that I want to reinforce this evening. When we say that the history of the world is outlined in Daniel chapter 2, we really mean the history of the world, the history of the biblical world. Because admittedly, Daniel chapter 2 does not include continents like North and South America, places like Australia, and some of the major countries of the Asian continent. So Daniel chapter 2 is really an outline of the history of the world from the perspective of the biblical world, the world of Europe and the Middle East and North Africa. Those kingdoms have to do with that area of the world. But it is still interesting to note that, yeah, all of the nations that I mentioned, like North and South America, they actually came out of the European Empire. So you could say that even North and South America, they were in some way an extension of the European Empire, the Roman Empire, in a way. But I'm not going to follow up that idea too much. Anyway, what we saw in Daniel chapter 2 was that one of the reasons why God gave Nebuchadnezzar the vision of the image, and let me see, let me go ahead and share my screen. Yeah, if you will recall, God gave Nebuchadnezzar an image, a vision. I'm sorry. He gave Nebuchadnezzar a vision of a great image. And the reason why he gave him this vision is because God wanted him to understand that there would be 4 kingdoms that would rule the world. Now, of course, this is not how Nebuchadnezzar's image looked. I didn't actually have a graphic of that, so let me just quickly see if I can find one. All right, let me bring up this one. Nebuchadnezzar's image looks something like this. All right, so the difference is that here you see that this image is made up of 4 parts, basically. The head is of gold. The breast and the arms are made of silver. The belly and the thighs are made of brass. The legs are made of iron. And then the iron changes to be mingled with clay down in the feet. So God explained this to Nebuchadnezzar. Through Daniel, he told Nebuchadnezzar that this image represented the empires that would control the world. And of course, Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom was Babylon. God told him that he represented the head of gold. And history tells us that after Babylon, the next great empire was Medo-Persia, which was followed by the empire of the Greeks under Alexander, which was followed by the empire of Rome or the Roman Empire. So this is what God showed to Nebuchadnezzar. Now, as we have seen, Nebuchadnezzar was a very proud person, and he was maybe rightly very proud of his empire, because he built Babylon into one of the greatest empires in the world, definitely at that time. And it was a place of great magnificence, very rich. So when God showed, if you look at this image, what you see is that it's clearly demonstrated that the kingdom of Babylon is going to pass. And of course, today, they say that today the Babylonian Empire is what we would call Iran. Iran is now where that Babylonian Empire was. But, Babylon has long gone, passed away. And Nebuchadnezzar, being the kind of person that he was very disturbed by this idea that his empire would pass away. One thing you will notice as you read the Bible is that what had a great deal of interest for them was their legacy. You'll notice that if a man died without having any children, it was considered a great disaster, whether it was a man or a woman. Usually a man would have children, because if he couldn't have children with one woman, he would take several, and he would end up with descendants somehow, unless he himself was a problem. Because of course, eunuchs, people who were made eunuchs, castrated, they could not have children. But if a woman could not have any children, it was considered a great disaster. And if a man had no heir, it was considered a real problem. So that is why when Abraham never had a son, his wife convinced him to go to his handmaid Hagar to get a child, because you had to have somebody to carry on your legacy. And it was a similar ambition upon those who were rulers, kings, monarchs. They wanted their legacy to continue. They wanted to know that they built something that would last forever. So, when God showed Nebuchadnezzar that his empire was limited, that it would only last for a time, Nebuchadnezzar was, of course, deeply disturbed by this news, because for him, the idea that his kingdom would eventually pass was very bad news. So, what I want to remind us is that last week, I'm going to go to chapter 1, and I'll show you. It's a chapter 1, chapter 2. Chapter 2. Let me go to chapter 2. Last week we saw at the end of chapter 2 where the king communed with them. There was none like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. It says, in all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in all his realm. So, the verse I was actually looking for is in chapter 1. Let me go back to chapter. Oh boy, how did I end here? It's in Daniel chapter 1. Okay, so this is a verse I'm looking for. It says, I'm getting myself confused. It's chapter 2. I beg your pardon. Please bear with me. This is the verse I'm looking for, where the verse says, all right. Yeah, we actually commented on this, but I wanted to reinforce it. It's verse 47. The king answered unto Daniel and said, of a truth it is that I even highlighted it so I wouldn't forget. I remember I highlighted it last week. He says, of a truth it is that your God is a God of gods. Now, you have to bear with the ignorance of this man. And remember that he's an honest person. He's confused, but he's honest. His revelation of God is that God is a God of gods. You know, when you come upon a phrase like this, it means that among the gods, you are outstanding. You are an extraordinary God among the gods. Like when you say somebody is King of Kings, it means there are many kings, but you are outstanding among these kings. You know, so we might use the phrase man. He's a man of men. He's a man of men. You mean that among men, he's outstanding. So this is what the king is saying. This is his revelation of God. He is a God of gods. And what makes him think so? He says he is a revealer of secrets. So it's interesting. If you will recall that in the Bible, God is given different names. Now today, if somebody were to ask you or me, what would you say? What would you say about God? What would you say is the characteristic of God that is most outstanding? Well, I would say that as far as his character goes, God is love. As far as his abilities go, I would say he's God Almighty. And when I say he's God Almighty, I mean he is everything. He can do anything, absolutely. He's the mightiest, he's the wisest, he is the most capable, he's able to see the future, everything. That's our revelation of God. But if you go to the Old Testament, you will find several times when people refer to him by different names. For example, when he's called, when he provided for Abraham, Abraham referred to him as Jehovah Jireh, God the provider. So that's something Abraham saw highlighted about God. He's God the provider. And when Moses and the Israelites fought and won a battle, I think it was against the Amalekites while they were in the wilderness, Moses called the name of the place Jehovah Nissi, which means the Lord is our Yahweh is our banner. Right? In other words, he is the flag behind which we fight. In Jeremiah, it says that the name by which he's called is the Lord our righteousness. So as people discovered different things about the character of God, they gave him a title. So Jehovah Nissi, Jehovah Jireh, the Lord our righteousness, I think is Jehovah Sidkenu. So different titles based on what they came to understand about him. So Nebuchadnezzar is doing the same thing here. He says, your God is a God of gods. He is a revealer of secrets. And if he had known the name of this God, he would have probably said, Jehovah the revealer. So that is his knowledge and that is his understanding of God. But what I want to emphasize is that in all of this, Nebuchadnezzar's concept of God was that he was an outstanding God, but he was just one God among many gods. Very important as we go through the story of Nebuchadnezzar that we remember this. He thought that the God of the Hebrews was one God among many gods. And as I pointed out, he had his own gods. He worshipped Bel, Nergal, a few of them. I don't know the names of all of them, but he had the gods of Babylon. So this is the perspective that we want to keep in mind as we look at Nebuchadnezzar and how he behaved in the next chapter that we're going to look at. So we're going to go quickly to chapter 3 of Daniel. That's where we are now. And look at what happens here in Daniel 3. It says in verse 1, Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold.
Hey, Brother Clayton.
Yes,
Are you
brother.
trying to show your Bible?
Yes, are you seeing it?
No.
Oh.
Seeing this, the statue.
Let me see. I think I need, okay, let me stop sharing and do this a different way. I think I know what I'm doing wrong. All right.
No, David, we were seeing the statue.
No, it's the Bible you should have been seeing.
Okay.
All right, tell me if you, now you're seeing the statue. Tell me if you can see the Bible now.
Yes, we can
All
see
right.
the Bible.
All right, thank you. I think I know I was doing something wrong. Um, all right, great. So Daniel chapter 3. It says Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits, and the breadth thereof 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura, in the province of Babylon. So, what is interesting about this statue, as we are going to see in a moment, is that this statue was made of gold from head to foot. We can read that in verse, we read that in verse 1. Nebuchadnezzar made the king made an image of gold. You can't help making the connection because it's the chapter before, chapter 2, that tells you about the image that Nebuchadnezzar dreamed about. And in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, the image, the head of the image was the only thing that was made of gold. Now, the meaning of the dream is very clear. Daniel explained it, and Nebuchadnezzar understood the meaning of the dream. The meaning of the dream is that Babylon is going to pass away. Now, Nebuchadnezzar makes an image of gold, not just the head, but head, breast and arms, belly and thighs, legs and feet. Everything is gold. You don't even need to be a genius to figure out what Nebuchadnezzar is saying and what he's planning. Look at what he does next. And I wanted to look at this in the context, especially those of you who are in the meeting this morning. You can consider what we were looking at this morning relating to worship and what it means. It says, then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent to gather together the princes, the governors, and the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. All right, he sends for all the high-ranking people in the kingdom, right? I don't think it's not everybody in the kingdom, because not everybody could hold on that plane, but it's the princes, governors, captains, judges, treasurers, counselors, sheriffs, and all the rulers. They are to come to this dedication of the image. It's the image that is going to be dedicated, right? Now it says, then the princes, the governors and captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces were gathered together unto the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then an herald cried aloud, to you it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages, that at what time you hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music, you fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. And whoso falleth not down and worshipeth shall the same hour be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. Now, if you were in the meeting this morning, you will remember that we looked at the subject of worship. And one of the things that we concluded, one of the things that I tried to point out, is that worship is a way of, the real meaning of worship is submission, submissiveness, submission. When you ask somebody to worship, in the true sense, you're asking them to submit. And I made the point that this is why worship and governments is tied together a lot in the Old Testament, in Bible times. Most kingdoms had a religious part, and they made sure that your worship was connected to the sovereignty, the government, the monarchy of the country that you are dealing with. So in some places, like even in Babylon, I see your brother Tony, I'm coming to you. In some places like in Babylon, Egypt, and a lot of these countries, the king himself was considered to be a kind of god, the king himself. And so in some cases, even like you see in Medo Persia, people were told to worship the king himself, To submit, it's a form of submissiveness. So what the king is doing here, he's asking people to worship an image, and the image represents Babylon. So he's asking them to worship Babylon, in other words, to worship the kingdom of Nebuchadnezzar. And the reason why he's doing this is because, and I'm coming to Brother Tony, let me just finish this point. People will think, okay, if I have a family, just think about this for a moment. I have a family, and let's say I am the ruler in my family, or in my village, I'm the ruler. And somebody comes along and makes a prediction that there's going to be a revolution in my village, and somebody is going to overthrow me and take over from me. Now, where am I going to look for that revolution to come from? It's going to come from inside the village. Somebody in the village is going to overthrow me. It's like when Herod heard that the Messiah, the King of the Jews, was born. He asked them, where is he supposed to be born? And they said, Bethlehem. So he went and he killed all the 2-year-old children, 2 years and under, in Bethlehem. He killed them in Bethlehem because he expected rebellion to rise out of Bethlehem from a child who was 2 years old and under. So he made sure to kill all the children in that area of that age group. So naturally, Nebuchadnezzar is thinking like this. If somebody is going to create another kingdom, if another kingdom is going to come after me, since my kingdom is ruling over the world, it has to come from somewhere within my kingdom. That's the way he's thinking. So he's saying, I'm going to make sure nobody in my kingdom will rise up against me. So he sends for everybody who might rise up, the princes, the governors, the rulers, all the people who have influence and who might have ambitions like that. He sends for them and he says, I'm going to see to it that they worship my kingdom. So he makes an image of representing his kingdom, and they are to bow down, or they are to submit, they are to worship, or they are to submit to his kingdom, and they are to show that sign of submission. So do we understand why this is not just pagan idolatry? There's a political aspect to it. There's some deep and well thought out meaning behind Nebuchadnezzar's action. He's not just a crazy person. Brother Tony, go ahead.
Yeah, okay, right quick. Can you hear me?
Yes, hearing you well.
Okay. Just like you were saying this morning that God demands worship, and it seems that Nebuchadnezzar demand worship also, but just like the historical institution of slavery in our world, it seemed like they were forced to worship him, and if they didn't worship him, that they would be met with brutal consequences. And that's something that God doesn't do. He doesn't force us to worship him.
Right, and to be perfectly fair, I'm going to modify what you said a little bit, Brother Tony, because it's true that God does not demand or force us to worship him, but it's true that in the past he did. I would make that qualification because remember, in the time of the Old Testament, if they worshipped idols, you could be killed for doing that. If you worshipped another god, you could be killed for that. So God did demand worship. You didn't have a choice. I mean, in a way they had a chance because they turned away. The whole nation turned against God at times. And when they did, they were worshiping other gods. And the thing is that under this condition, God abandoned them and left them up to their enemies. But if you know the consequence for worshiping other gods, remember at Mount Sinai, not Sinai, at Mount Carmel. I could mention Sinai too, when Moses came down from Sinai and they were worshiping the golden calf. 300 of them were killed. And at Mount Carmel, when Elijah went to face the prophets of Baal, he had 850 of them killed after the fire came down from heaven. They slaughtered all of them. So, the Old
So
Testament...
how about now?
No. Now it's completely different because we know the Old Testament was a type and illustration. There are deep lessons to be learned from the Old Testament experience, which makes it very complicated to understand what was going on there. And we have studied this ourselves from time to time. And maybe another day we will go back and look at some of it. But the point is that what happened in the Old Testament was a teaching tool. It was not the way God is. I can say that confidently. The Old Testament does not represent how God is. The Old Testament is a lesson book where God is showing the consequences of the things that we do. It will take a whole session to explain it properly. And so I think I'm going to take the time and go through it one day, because probably there are some genuine questions that people have. But you're right, Brother Tony. That is not the way God is. And now, since Jesus came and we have moved from illustration to the real thing, everything is now operating the way how God really is. And in this age, absolutely. Everything is expressing the true character of God. God forces nobody. God is worshipped, but he's worshipped because we choose to worship him. That is not how other systems operate. Worldly systems do not operate that way. Well, anyway, I won't go into that too much, but all of this is coming out even here in this story of Nebuchadnezzar's image. So Nebuchadnezzar made this image of gold, and he told everybody that they must bow down and worship the image. But the point I really wanted to emphasize is that Nebuchadnezzar is looking for submissiveness. And in looking for complete submissiveness, where does he turn? He turns to religion. Because religion, worship means submissiveness. And so he turns to religion because religion is connected with the government. As I said, the reason why religion and government are connected like that is because that's the reason why religion and government is always connected together, because religion brings wholehearted surrender or submissiveness. And that is what these governments want. And I would even say this without getting into it too much, but I think that it is something to be considered that there is this striking, growing marriage in America. There's a growing marriage in America between the administration, the present administration, and the evangelical Christians in America. And those people are so far removed from good sense and from rationality and reason that they are pushing for the government, they are pushing for the state to make laws forcing people to behave a certain way with regards to worship. And this is the method of those governments in the past, and it is a method of Satan. It is not God's method. But because these people don't understand the difference between the old and the new covenant, they hold to that kind of abominable perspective. But anyway, so Nebuchadnezzar demands worship, and the consequences are fearsome. Anybody who does not fall down and worship, anybody who does not submit, failure to worship is a statement that you are not subject to the king of Babylon and to the kingdom of Babylon. And if you are a person in authority, like a sheriff or a ruler or a governor or somebody, and you do not submit to Nebuchadnezzar and the kingdom of Babylon, it's death for you, because it means that somewhere, someday, you might raise up rebellion against the king. You see the thinking behind Nebuchadnezzar, and you see why this is not simply an example of mindless, brutal, primitive idolatry. No. It is a well thought out system to preserve the dominion of the kingdom. And even though it's a little more crude in Nebuchadnezzar's time, but if you look at today's world, you don't see where the principle is any different. If you look at, I could talk about Jamaica, where there's so much corruption at election time, the way they fight, I mean, people get killed and all kinds of rubbish when it's election time. But I would talk about America because America is the most visible place in the world. And everybody looks at America and they think America is the bastion of liberty and democracy. And look, when you see the Republicans and the Democrats struggling for power, the amount of lies they tell, the amount of deception they pull on the people, the amount of conniving and it would be a joke to me, except that it is so serious. When I look on Facebook and I see the supporters, I mean, among people who call themselves Christians, when I look at the supporters of these two divisions, the Republicans and the Democrats, and one side is so elevating and exalting their side, and everything that the other side does, they find a way to condemn and bring them down. You know what they're seeking for? They're seeking for worship. They wouldn't mind if they could compel everybody to submit, to surrender to their system. It's the same principle, except that Nebuchadnezzar had a little bit more power and he put it to use. But it's the same system, the same principle. It's a system that is anti-God, contrary to God. And we see it happening here in the days of Nebuchadnezzar. So, what happened? Trouble immediately. Whenever something like that happens, whenever somebody requires worship, whether for himself or for his government or for his kingdom, whenever somebody requires worship and God's people are present, trouble automatically arises. You, God's people, don't have to do anything. You just have to stand up where you are. It says, therefore, at that time, when all the people heard the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and all kinds of music, all the people, the nations, and the languages fell down and worshipped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. So Nebuchadnezzar is quite pleased with himself. Everybody in his kingdom seems to be loyal. But if you look at this picture, you realize that there's something that is a bother. It says, wherefore at that time certain Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews. Now when it says the Jews, it means 3 Jews in particular. Why does it say they accused the Jews? Because there were 3 Jews, well actually there were 4, but one of them apparently was not present. He was too big to come to this, right? There were 3 Jews who were set in positions of governorship in Babylon, right? Remember, he sent for the princes, the governors, the men in position. So the only Jews who would be there are these 3. And the reason why they are there is because Daniel asked the king to put them in positions of authority. Everybody else is from Babylon or maybe some other place that is loyal to Babylon. But these 3 Jews were prisoners and they had been exalted to high positions in Babylon because of Daniel. So when it says the Jews, it means the 3 who were there. It's not everybody who came. It was those who were in positions of authority. So it says, certain Chaldeans came there and accused the Jews. And, you know, I like the way, I find it interesting the way they operate in those days. They go back and they repeat everything that the king had said to make sure they get everything right. They spake and said to the king, Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. Thou, O king, hast made a decree, and they go back to repeat the decree, that every man that shall hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, and all kinds of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And they're reminding him, and whoso falleth not down and worshipeth, that he should be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. That they make sure remind the king, so they can get every detail of what he himself has said. Then they come now. There are certain Jews whom thou hast set over the affairs of the province of Babylon. Now they remind the king that these people are in this position because of you. I think it is likely that in their hearts, these elders, these leaders in Babylon were envious of the Jews. You don't take somebody from among a defeated nation and put them in positions of authority. They probably had authority over some of these same Chaldeans. And that would have caused resentment and rankling, because you have to submit and obey these people who are aliens. And so that's why they are repeating, King, you are the one who set them up over the affairs of the province of Babylon. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded thee. You see how they put it? They don't regard you. In Jamaica, they would say, they not check for you. They don't regard you. They serve not your gods, nor worship the golden image which you have set up. So this is the point. This is what is the whole point of the entire exercise. It's for them to submit to the king, and they submit to the king by serving the gods that the king tells them to serve. It's all about worship, as we pointed out this morning. So they make sure what they're actually saying to the king is that these people, they are potentially rebels against your empire. These men are dangerous to have in your empire because they're not people you can trust to be loyal to you under all conditions. And for any government, this is a very, very critical accusation. You know, one of the things I see happening on YouTube, I watch what's going on there sometimes. I see where there are some videos that are saying that whether it's true or not, I don't know, and I don't care, but they are saying that J.D. Vance, there are people who are trying to put in the idea that J.D. Vance, who is the vice president, I believe, they say that it seems like he's plotting to overthrow Donald Trump. Now, you know, if there is ever any credible evidence of this, then immediately Trump will do everything in his power to move him out of the way. When he doesn't agree with somebody, that person goes. You know, like Elon Musk, he disagreed with him. Musk goes. And anybody who is not absolutely loyal to him is going to go, right? So these people around Nebuchadnezzar, I mean, in those days, it was absolutely necessary that you be a yes man. If you dared to contradict the king in any way, your head was in jeopardy. So Nebuchadnezzar had the greatest confidence that when he made this image, he was setting up a way to certify that his kingdom would be secure, because nobody would dare to stand up to him, and anybody did was going to die. So it was the greatest shock. It was the greatest shock when 3 men were discovered standing up and not bowing to the image. So the accusers made a point. They don't serve your gods and they don't worship the golden image. Now, notice what they say. They do not serve your gods. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar still believes that there are many gods. Nebuchadnezzar, what does he know about the God of Israel? He knows that this God is a revealer of secrets. He's a God of gods. He is able to understand secrets. But understanding secrets, okay, that's nice. But this is Nebuchadnezzar, and this is Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom. And we will see in a moment how he sees that whole situation. It says, then Nebuchadnezzar, in his rage and fury. Man, that's the way it is when you are accustomed to having your way. Even though we admit that Nebuchadnezzar was a very astute king, but he was not accustomed to being defied. The words rage and fury expressed the kind of anger that he felt, that somebody could dare to disagree, obey his voice. You see, he had a carefully crafted plan to make sure that his kingdom was bound up by loyalty to him. And here are 3 men openly defying him, and not only 3 men that he has put in positions of authority. 3 men who should be willing to bow and scrape and do anything he says, because he gave them prisoners, he gave them this high position. So he's absolutely enraged that these men should be trying to undermine his authority. That's how he would look at it. So he commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spake and said unto them, you can imagine his tone. Is it true? Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Do not you serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up? Now by this time, Nebuchadnezzar doesn't even know that they have not even been eating his food. The food offered to his gods. I suppose if he had found out this from the beginning, that's how he might have behaved when he heard that they weren't eating the food. But remember that the butler took away the king's food and gave them what they asked for, unknown to the king. So this is the first little inkling the king has that these men are not respecting his God. Now, when Daniel had told him the meaning of his vision, he said, your God is a revealer of secrets. But of course, my gods are equally mighty, or even more mighty, because my nation overthrew your nation. So of course he takes it for granted that Daniel and his three companions will have great respect for his gods. So why wouldn't they bow down to his gods? So this is a revelation to him that they won't bow to his God. He says, is it true? Do not you serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up? Question, and I'm not expecting you to answer, because this is what I'm going to tell you. He's saying to them, now, if you be ready, that at what time you hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, and all kinds of music, you fall down and worship the image which I have made, well, but if you worship not, you shall be cast the same hour into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands? This verse, this statement that I have highlighted on the screen, today we look at this and think, what an arrogant scoundrel was Nebuchadnezzar.
We don't see your screen, David.
You're not seeing my screen? Is this true for everybody? Not
No, I see the screen.
Oh, you're
I
seeing
see
the
the
screen.
No, I see
I
it.
can see the screen.
All right, it's on your side, brother lad.
Okay, sorry.
Yes. So this is an expression of, it's not an expression of, today if you hear a man talk like this, we would wonder what a bare-faced, out of order reprobate. But you have to think of it in the context of the time of Nebuchadnezzar, a man who believes in multiple gods, a man who believes that his gods have every right to be worshipped, just like the God of Israel. Because in those days, every nation had their gods. One of the reasons why God dealt the way he did with Israel was a way of showing. He wanted the nations to understand that the God of Israel was the greatest God of all. That's where God started. We are well advanced today to the place where we know there's only one God. But back in those times, Nebuchadnezzar's behavior was not unusual. His attitude was not unusual because of the kind of beliefs that he had. What is interesting is the final statement that he makes. He said, and who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands? That is not such a bare-faced statement when you consider that Nebuchadnezzar himself was understood by the Babylonians to be some kind of minor deity. And if you think about the way they understood gods in those days, if you think of the gods of the Greeks and the gods of the Romans, you have Zeus, you have Thor, you have Loki, you have these nations, these gods. When you read the stories about them, they are like men, but they are a little more powerful. They are more like angels, the way they are described. So you can understand why Nebuchadnezzar would think that I have an army of hundreds of thousands. I can manage one or two gods. There are even stories, if you read stories, there are stories of the gods coming down and men actually making war, fighting against them in some cases, right? Usually the men lose, but the gods are just a little bit more powerful than men. These are the concepts they had of gods. And up to this point, Nebuchadnezzar has no reason to think that the God of Israel is any different, because he was able to conquer the Jews. He was able to conquer the Jews. And if the God of Israel was so powerful, why was he so able to conquer them? So he has reason to think that his gods are greater than the gods of Israel, than the God of Israel. So that is why he asked this question: who is that God? Which God is going to save you out of my hand? He's not just arrogant and boastful. He's actually reasoning on the basis of his understanding. And we have to understand that God deals with people on the basis of where they are. Because maybe if somebody had said this, like, like the Bible tells you in the time of Herod, when Herod gave a speech, and they said it is a voice of a God and not a man. Herod was supposed to be the leader of Israel, or the governor of Israel. He knew everything about the Jewish religion. So when he said this, God didn't deal with him the same way. He was smitten with a terrible disease that killed him right away when he made himself out to be God. On that occasion and in that context, okay? So now the king says, if you don't, you're dead. And no God can save you. The answer of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is beautiful. It's awe-inspiring. It's not just what they say, it's the way they say it. They start out, they don't just say, we're not going to bow. It says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, the first thing they say, we are not careful to answer you in this matter. Let me see if I can find a translation that puts it the way I think it should be. We do not need to defend ourselves. All right, all of them are saying kind of like what I have in mind, but I wanted to put it a little differently. Okay, they say, NASB says, we do not need to give you an answer concerning this matter. We don't need to answer you. The NIV says, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. The World English Bible says, we have no need to answer you in this matter. The way I understand it, and I'm not finding fault with those translations, not at all. The way I would put it is, they are saying to the king, King, you don't need to give us a second chance. We don't need to think twice about this. All right? Because actually the king had already made his decree. He had already made his point. He had already said those who don't worship are going into the fire. So why does he come back and give them and say it to them again? He's actually saying, look here, I'm giving you a second chance. And you can understand that the probable reason why he's giving them a second chance is because he has a lot of respect for these men. First of all, they are the friends of Daniel. And secondly, I believe they were doing a great work in his kingdom. He knew everything that was going on. He knew that they were very dependable and hardworking young men. So he understood. I suppose he would think they are young, but they are zealous. Let me give them a second chance. And so he makes sure to make his point in the sternest possible voice. And when he has finished with his sternness and his ultimatum, they say, it's okay, king. Don't give us a second chance. We don't need to think about this twice. They don't even say give us a few moments to think this over. There is no question, no compromise, no hesitation. And I love this. And I'm going to tell you something as Christians. I'm talking to everybody. You know, let me. When you are put in positions where you have responsibility, or where Satan wants something out of you, he will normally give you a second chance. And if you are hesitant and you don't talk straight, this is one thing I've learned in life, and I'll tell you, the story here reinforces it, right? Somebody comes and says, let's use an example. They say, I know you're a Sabbath keeper, you know, I know you don't work on Saturdays, but we're having something this Friday evening. It's going to run a little late, and we're going to ask you to just work a little late this evening. You can say, I don't really want to do that, because I don't want to let down my principles. Or you can say, I appreciate you letting me know this, but absolutely there's no question. It will never happen. You have two ways of doing it. When you answer the first way, you put yourself in great danger. Or I've seen this happen many times, right? I'm going to be a little adult in this statement. I think all of us understand. A man comes and he's trying to influence a young lady to have his way with her. And a lot of times, a lot of young ladies, they will say, they're kind of hesitant and trying to put up a feeble resistance. That is like putting oil on water, oil on fire for a man. That little bit of influence, that little bit of resistance is attractive. A woman else says, in the name of Jesus, leave with that suggestion. When you are strong and you are firm, you kill his spirit right away. Now, why am I saying this? Because I'm saying this because I'm looking at the way these men answer Nebuchadnezzar. And I'm saying that when you are Christians, the way you respond to a temptation is very important. The moment you leave a little crack in the door, you're in great danger. When you are uncompromising, God is with you. And that is the time when you're going to see miracles. So these young men, they don't even think twice. They say, King, keep your second chance. We don't need to be careful. And they make the king know straight, if it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. If it be so, and I so love this because they say, King, maybe we're going to die today. We don't know. We're not telling you that we are going to be saved. We're not telling you. But we're telling you that our God can do it. To me, this is the greatest kind of faith, when you know that God can, but you're not demanding that he do it because you know that God is wiser than you. Our God can do it. He is able to deliver us. And if it be so, he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. So they are first of all responding to the question, who is that God? And they're saying, our God is able. And if he wants, he will deliver us. But then they say, but if not, we know that we might die today. Depends on the will of our God. But anyway, king, we're going to tell you, be it known unto thee, O king, we will not serve your gods. We won't worship the golden image which you have set up. Now, I think they could have been more diplomatic. I think they could have softened things a little for the king. I think they could have said, King, we respect you and we honor you. We don't really want to do this. So we're asking you to reconsider. No! No, these men are here and they are here on God's business. And they are in Babylon and they are prisoners in Babylon. But look, they love and they honor and they trust in the Lord God Almighty. And so they say, King, you can kill us. And if our God allows it, so be it. But I'm telling you, King, we're not even toning down our answer. We will not serve your God. You better know this, King. We will not serve your gods. We will not worship the image that you have set up. Nebuchadnezzar is giving them a second chance. They are not giving Nebuchadnezzar a second chance at all. They're saying, this is how it is, and you can take it or leave it. This is what it is going to be. So Nebuchadnezzar was mad before. Now he's doubly mad. It says, then was Nebuchadnezzar full of fury, and the form of his visage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now what this means is that his attitude towards them changes. His facial attitude and his attitude inside changes. Because if you're Nebuchadnezzar, what are you thinking? You know what you're thinking? These men are trying to make me look small in front of everybody. That's what he's thinking. If they had asked to talk to the king and they went around the corner and had a conversation with him, the king would have felt better. But in front of everybody, they are telling the king, we don't care, we're not bending, we're not bowing. So his attitude changes as far as he's concerned. Now it's not just about their loyalty. They are trying to make him look small in front of everybody. And he cannot tolerate this. So what the king does is interesting. It says, therefore he spake and commanded that they should heat the furnace 7 times more than it was wont to be heated. Now, you know why that is interesting? The furnace was already hot enough to kill everybody. The furnace was already hot enough to kill all of these men. But why does the king command that it should be 7 times hotter? And I'm going to suggest a reason to you. Remember, the king makes a statement. The king says, who is that God that can deliver you? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego says, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us. The king says, oh yes, let us see. We're going to make sure that no God can save you. So he says maybe God is planning to cool down the fire. So he makes sure that the fire is 7 times hotter. That's number one. So if it was hot enough to kill them 10 times over before, now it's hot enough to kill them 70 times over. Secondly, he commanded the most mighty men that were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Now, again, second point, why does he send for the most mighty men that were in his army? I mean, first of all, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are not fighting. They are submitting to whatever the king says. Why does he send for the strongest? I mean, any soldiers could have done it. He could have just said, okay, 10 of you, hold them and throw them in the fire. But he makes sure he picks out the strongest, the mightiest men that are in the army. Why is Nebuchadnezzar doing this? I'm going to tell you what I think. You know what Nebuchadnezzar believes? He believes that God is going to try a thing. He believes that God is going to try to deliver Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, probably come down and try to take them away from the soldiers. He's trying to cover all the bases. He thinks God is going to try to save these men, and I'm going to make sure there's no way he can save them. He's going to discipline them today and make them know they're not going to make him look smart. So all of these details in the story are very telling. It's not just incidental. Everything is telling you about the way Nebuchadnezzar is thinking. Because up to this point, my brothers and sisters, he has no clue who he is dealing with. He has no clue who he is dealing with. And we see where it says in verse 21, then these men were bound in their coats, their hosen, I think that was the kind of trousers they had in those days, their hats and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. And if you look at what it says next, this is so amazing. Therefore, because the king's commandment was urgent and the furnace exceeding hot, the flame of the fire slew those men that took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now, that is kind of amazing. How do you go so near to a fire until it kills you? I'm trying to make sense of it. And you know what I think? Sometimes when I'm around a very hot fire, I will put a coat in front of me or some object. You can go right up close to the fire in such a case, and you won't feel the heat. But if you move the thing from in front of you, the blast of it will damage you. It can even burn you badly. But if you are hidden behind something, you can get very close to the fire. And so I'm thinking, what happened? I'm trying to reason it out here. I'm thinking what happened. These men that were told to throw these men in the fire, they put them in front of them. And they pushed them, and because the king's commandment was urgent, and they knew that if they didn't do the job properly, they were going to lose their head. So they wanted to make sure that they put them in the fire properly. So they hid behind them and pushed them as close as possible to the fire. Pushed them in. And then the blast of heat knocked them down. And they died right there in front of the furnace. It was something like that. So that can tell you it was, first of all, it was the heat was exceedingly great. And Nebuchadnezzar's command, Nebuchadnezzar's voice was not something you trifled with or you tolerated. You trifled with. He would tolerate no resistance in any way at all. So the men who threw them in the furnace died. It says, and these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down, bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astounded, and rose up in haste and spake and said to his counselors. I mean, he is so befuddled by what he sees that he's trying to make sure that he's remembering correctly. There's a little funny video I saw on something that happened to a man in Jamaica. Okay, and it's a real story. But the little man is watching his banana, his bunch of bananas, and one morning he and his friend goes there, and the banana is gone, and he's lamenting and mourning that the thief is banana, and the man is so distraught. He's saying, I have to go and tell me. I mean, he's speaking Jamaican. I can't speak Jamaican here, otherwise nobody will understand. He said, why? They cut the banana. He said, go look if they cut it. And he's calling his friend, and then he's so distraught. Me have to go tell Tati so they cut the banana. And then he's so distraught, he says to his friend, come look if they cut it. He's telling his friend to come and look if they cut it. He can't believe his eyes. All he's seeing is a spot, and so he's telling his friend, come and look if they cut it. So Nebuchadnezzar is doing something like that. He can't believe what he's seeing. He's making sure that he's not hallucinating. He said, wasn't it three men that we tied up and put in the fire? They answered and said unto the king, true, O king. He can't believe what he's seeing. He wants to make sure. He answered and said, lo. I imagine he's speaking in a very different tone of voice. I see four men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt. And then he adds, and the form of the fourth is like the Son of God. Now, of course, there's a little bit of, I really don't think that they were standing this close to the furnace at all. But anyway, here's an artist's impression of what it was like. Four men in the fire, they are not bound. They are walking around in the fire like they are taking a stroll on a summer's evening with the breeze in their faces. And Nebuchadnezzar is a mass. His face is a mass of expressions. He doesn't know what to say. And I see you, Brother Tony. I'll get to you in just a moment. I just want to make a comment here where it says that the form of the fourth is like the Son of God. Now, I know that in some circles they like to make a big thing of this, but I absolutely believe that this is a mistranslation. If you look at what it says in the NASB, it says the appearance of the fourth is like a son of the gods, a son of the gods. And that makes absolute sense, because all we have seen so far is that Nebuchadnezzar did not know the God of heaven. He knew very little about him. He had no concept of who he was, much more to know that this God had a son. Absolutely not. So what he's saying is that this person looks like a son of the gods. He believes in many gods, and he believes that a son of the gods is somebody who is coming from the presence of the gods, one of the gods. That's what he's saying, right? So he sees somebody there who looks like he's not from this earth. He sees somebody who has a brilliant appearance, and is somebody he doesn't know. 3 men put in the fire, 4 walking in the fire. Nebuchadnezzar's mind is blown. Let me pause a little and just take your point, Brother Tony, and then Sister Talia. Brother Tony.
Well, actually, that was my question
All right.
about that.
Okay, Brother Tony.
About him recognizing that the Son of God was in there.
All right.
But I mean, doesn't Psalm speak about the Son of God?
There are a few places in the Old Testament that speak about God having a son, like Ecclesiastes chapter, no, like Proverbs 30. Proverbs 30 talks about the Son of God. There were very few people who knew that God had a son. Very few. Proverbs 30 is one of those places. But by and large, even among the Jews, they didn't know that God had a son. By and large, if there was anybody who knew, it was a rare individual. Absolutely, Nebuchadnezzar had no clue. To know that the God of heaven had a son was high knowledge, and he certainly didn't have that kind of knowledge of the God of heaven.
Okay. Yeah, right. Proverbs. My mistake. Okay.
Okay, brother.
Thank you.
All right. Yes, Sister Talia.
Thank you, Brother David. I was just a little bit curious to the same question. But wouldn't after the Hebrew boys had acknowledged the vision and interpreted it to Nebuchadnezzar, that after that point when Nebuchadnezzar acknowledged that he was he was the God of many gods, that they would have been teaching him, they would have been in his court teaching him about the true God, that they would know or would have known even through dreams who the Son of God was, that they were informing and maybe teaching Nebuchadnezzar about?
Believe me, if they had been teaching Nebuchadnezzar about the true God, he would never have put them in the furnace. Nebuchadnezzar is not a man who was willing to listen to other people and things like that. And you can see it from the way, who is that God who can save you out of my hand? He is speaking on the basis of the knowledge that he has about the God of Israel. And what he knows about the God of Israel is that he's a revealer of secrets. We will see later on how his awareness of this God develops. Because next week or the next chapter, we are going to see how God takes Nebuchadnezzar even further. But it is clear that at this point, his knowledge of God is very primitive, very rudimentary. The knowledge that God has a son, even in the New Testament, even to the Jews in the New Testament, was an amazing revelation. I think it is very, very unlikely that Nebuchadnezzar was given this knowledge, even if Daniel understood it. Brother Lad, go ahead.
Okay. I have some different thoughts about that, and I'll just throw them out there. The Bible is clear that the gospel has been preached from Adam all the way. Even says in Hebrews it was preached to the children of Israel. Noah was a preacher of righteousness, and so we all know that. It's kind of almost impossible to preach the gospel without having the Son of God absent. It's not the gospel if you take that out. So that's my first thought, that the Bible is clear that, there's always been an everlasting gospel, even though that there was the old covenant, the everlasting gospel was still taught through types and shadows back then. I believe some got it and some didn't. This is why I think that Moses, Joshua, Caleb, this is why I think those men were so different, because they had accepted that gospel, and that's what made them the men that they were. Not that there was just anything special about them. It was the presence of the Father and the Son living in them, just not Jesus as the Comforter. So one, that kind of shows me that it's kind of difficult for me to think that the Son of God would be absent in the gospel that was preached from then. Maybe not as clear as what we have today. Also, the Jews actually knew that God had a son, because the word Christ means the Son of God. Even the Samaritans said, "We know this now. We know this is the Christ, the Son of the living God." So I don't know if you've ever done a word study on the word Christ, but in the New Testament, it's a very common association that the Christ will be the Son of God. And um, so I kind of think that there was, and I would tend to believe that in a culture of many gods, and once that um, Nebuchadnezzar had that dream revealed to him, which no other, the inquiry to put them over and to have dialogue with them. And I think that for with the Spirit of God being in Daniel and those guys, that they would even try to witness to Nebuchadnezzar the gospel. It's just that that's the nature of God, to save everybody that's lost. You can't get saved without the gospel. So I would tend to believe that there was a discussion at some point about the Son of God, and it doesn't mean that he knows him. It's just he's hearing a different religion. He's hearing about a different God, a God who has a son, and this was just. But it doesn't mean that he accepts it. At this point, he's learning. But I mean, a lot of us have heard the gospel before we accepted it, and I believe that. I think his statement. This is me personally. I think his statement is actually prompted by the Spirit of God. That how would he know to say something like that? And I think it's telling, because I know that God, we definitely see that God is working to save Nebuchadnezzar. And there's a series of events, and he's having to have things to come. And I know that God always tries the easy way. And if you reject him, he has to step up the measures to promise and to help us, to maybe make us more acceptable, what's the word?
Receptive.
Yeah, to do that. We see that also play out like he did with Jonas and things. So I actually believe that God is trying to reach Nebuchadnezzar, and I believe it started with the dream, and then that opened him up to be kind of give some credibility to what Daniel would have led to share with him the gospel. Doesn't mean he receives it, but he's planting and watering. I think these are planting and watering moments that he's trying to reach him. And then I think that was probably a spirit-led moment there, that the Son of God is real. We've all been convicted, and I rejected God several times before I came to him. And then I think, it escalates to God actually has to put him in a place where he has to lose his mind, kind of flat on his back but he knew, and I agree with you, he doesn't intimately know the God, but he's hearing about the God. So this is just a few of my thoughts.
All right.
I would see this differently.
All right. And I'll respond to those thoughts because, of course, what we're doing is looking at the data and we're interpreting it in ways that seem to make sense to us. So none of this is set in stone. But I'm going to give you my perspective as well, because I still feel pretty strongly about this. And first of all, let me just comment on the word Christ, as I understand it, is equivalent to the Messiah, and the Messiah means the anointed one. And I understand that the idea of Christ or the Messiah was that there was an anointed one who was coming. There was one who was coming who was going to do God's work of delivering humanity. That's what the anointed one stands for. Now, if they understood this person to be the Son of God, they did refer to him as the Son of God. But if we understand the thinking of the Jews, nobody believed that he was literally the Son of God. They looked at him as the Son of God in the sense of somebody that God would bless in a special way. That's how they understood him being the Son of God. If you examine the mindset of those first century Jews, that's what they saw. In response to that point, second point I want to make is that the gospel. Now, you said something that is the way we understand the gospel. But I believe this is missing the point. When we say that you can't preach the gospel without Jesus Christ in it, I believe that is an oversimplification of the truth. And this is what I mean. I believe there are people who are going to be saved by the gospel without ever hearing that God had a son, without ever knowing that God had a son. People will be saved by the same good news. So Jesus is God's way of expressing the good news. Jesus is God's way of expressing the good news. But if you ask me, what is the true gospel? What is the true good news? I'll tell you this is the good news. The good news is that the God of heaven, the God of the universe, is a God of love. That's the good news. Now, this good news comes to us in the context of the love demonstrated through the Son of God. We come to know that love through Jesus Christ. Or that's the easiest way we can get to know the love. So the gospel is connected to Christ in that way. But the gospel is the kind of person God is. That's the good news. That's the greatest news in the universe. That's my understanding of the gospel in its essence. So I don't think people had to know about the Son of God in order to be saved at all. And I think there are many people who will be saved who never knew about the Son of God. Now, here's the final point I want to make. Nebuchadnezzar says, the form of this person is like the Son of God. What does he know about the form of the Son of God? How does he know it's not an angel? How does he know it's not some other kind of heavenly being? Why does he say it's like the Son of God? Even if Daniel knew that God had a son and Daniel shared it with Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel could never have told Nebuchadnezzar what this Son of God looks like, because Daniel never saw him. Nobody ever saw him in the Old Testament. So for Daniel to say, or for Nebuchadnezzar to say, this person looks like the Son of God, his form looks like the Son of God, is to assume that somebody had seen the Son of God and could give a description. And so when Nebuchadnezzar saw this person in the fire, he said, look, his face or his form or his clothing looks like this Son of God. So when I consider all of that, for me, the least likely thing, the most likely thing is that Nebuchadnezzar says, like we see in the other versions, the form of this person is like a son of the gods. This person looks like a heavenly being. This is what he was saying. And I think logically, what we can understand is that it was an angel that came down to them in the fire. Okay? I know this is not the traditional thinking, but when Daniel was put in the lion's den, it was not Jesus who came down there. Daniel says, my God has sent his angel and has shut the lion's mouth. And in almost every case that you can find in the Old Testament, when somebody was delivered, it was an angel that was sent. So it seems most unlikely to me that in this case it's Jesus himself who came down, and that Nebuchadnezzar could look at this being and know that it is Jesus. There's no way that it could make sense that Nebuchadnezzar can actually look at this person and know that is what Jesus, the Son of God, looks like. So those are my points. So if you're going to come back, lad, I'm going to ask you to make it as short as possible, because I don't mind if I could finish the chapter this evening.
Okay, yeah, we can kind of agree to disagree on that, but I definitely think that we should at some point talk about your statement that the people can be saved without hearing about Jesus. And the reason that I say that, and why I said it, is definitely in Romans chapter 10, where it talks about salvation. It says, how can they call upon him whom they have not believed? How can they believe in whom he has not been preached? That is specifically talking about Jesus. Mm-hmm. And so it seems very, very, very clear that you can't exclude the Son of God out of the gospel and it still be the gospel. And so there's a lot of text we could go over, but I really, maybe at another day, I would like to revisit that, because
all right. And We can do that. We can do that. And this evening is probably not the best time on this
Right.
occasion.
I agree. I agree. I just throwing that out there for maybe later or something.
All right. Okay, so it says, then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the mouth of the burning fire furnace. Now his approach and his attitude is very different. He speaks and says, when it says he came near, I imagine he came as near as it was possible to come without being overwhelmed by the flames. But he's so blown away by what has happened that he's not even hardly noticing the burning of the furnace. He spake and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ye servants of the Most High God. Now, what is he saying now? I want you to notice the difference. The way he addresses God. He says, the Most High God. Remember, in chapter 2, he refers to God as a revealer of secrets. He's a God of gods, a revealer of secrets. But now, his terminology is adjusted upwards. He refers to him as the Most High God. Why does he now call God the Most High God? It's because this God is proving to be stronger than his gods. He's now asking them respectfully, come forth and come hither. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth of the midst of the fire. And the princes and the governors and the captains and the king's counselors being gathered together saw these men upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was an hair of their heads singed, neither were their coats changed, nor the smell of fire had passed on them. And, you know, that's why I always say that when God does something, it is properly done. Because you could go in the fire and not even the smell of the fire. My God, it's so wonderful the way he does things. Not even a hair of the head was singed. You can't go near the fire. If I go near the fire with my hands, man, I have some hairs on my hand. Anytime I go too close to the fire, sometimes I'm putting something on the fire, and I smell the smell of singed hair, because it will singe your hair far long before it burns you. So God absolutely does not do things by half measures. This is why even when I look around these days and I look at some of these people who claim that they are doing healing and all of that, they say they healed somebody and the person couldn't walk and now he's walking, but he's hopping, he's dropping to one side, and they say that that is God's healing. I absolutely am appalled when I see that, because that's not the way I know God to operate. When God does something, in the Bible it says that the man was crippled from birth. And when Peter healed him at the gate of the temple, they said they saw the man in the temple leaping, and praising God. God does not do things by half measures, partially. They say they heal you today and tomorrow you're back in the wheelchair. They said you lost your feet, so you're gone back to where you were. All this kind of nonsense. That's not the kind of way that I see God doing things. So, not even the smell of fire was on these men. Then Nebuchadnezzar spake and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Look at what Nebuchadnezzar says here. This is the key. This answers the question. Who has sent his angel? All right. I think that puts the nail in the coffin for brothers and sisters. Nebuchadnezzar didn't believe it was the Son of God. He said it was an angel. It can't be both things. Nebuchadnezzar explains himself what he thought. He said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel. Nebuchadnezzar says it's an angel, which makes far more sense that he said, a son of the gods. And delivered his servants that trusted in him. And see what is amazing to Nebuchadnezzar? And he has changed the king's word. Nebuchadnezzar is amazed at this, because Nebuchadnezzar's word is law. When Nebuchadnezzar says, off with his head, then the head goes off. When he says, exalt him, then he's exalted. But now, the king is amazed that this God, he still regards him, labels him as the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But he's amazed that this God is the Most High God, who has changed the king's word and yielded their bodies that they might not serve nor worship any God except their own God. He still believes in multiple gods, but he believes that now this God has made it that they will not worship any other God. So Nebuchadnezzar is still very much in darkness. His character has not changed, but God is taking him one step at a time. And so he says, therefore I make a decree. That's what he's good at, making decrees. Every people, nation, and language which speak anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made a dunghill, because there's no other God that can deliver after this sort. I find it amusing. Nebuchadnezzar is a man who likes to turn people's house into dunghill, and he likes to chop people in pieces. But at least on this occasion now, his threats are directed in the right place. All right? Anybody who speaks anything against his God, he himself was saying vile things against his God just a few moments ago. He himself was belittling this God, but now, having seen for himself the power of this God, his way of responding is not the way you and I would respond, because we believe in freedom, but he didn't. And so he makes a law compelling people to respect this God. But as we will see in the next chapter, God is still not finished with Nebuchadnezzar. So Nebuchadnezzar says, why is he behaving like this? Because there is no other God that can deliver after this sort. So I want you to notice, at the end of the last chapter, Nebuchadnezzar said, or somewhere in the last chapter, verse 22, or 25. Where was it? What verse was it again? Let me see. I want to find it and read. Oh, I have it marked. Yeah, 47, way down there. This is what Nebuchadnezzar first learned about the God of Daniel. Your God is a revealer of secrets. Revelation number 1. Then from this second experience now, he learns that your God is a deliverer. There's no other God who can deliver after this sort. So, two things he has learned about the God of Israel. Number one, he is a revealer of secrets. He knows things that no other God knows or can know. Secondly, he is a deliverer. No other God can deliver like this God. And it's wonderful to see that this heathen king, but an honest man, it's amazing to see the way God is working in his life. And we are going to see that there's one more great lesson that Nebuchadnezzar has to learn. It says, then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. You know, I love that it says, before honor is humility. He that abaseth himself shall be exalted. God allowed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to go to the lowest depths of all. God proved whether they would be faithful to him. And when they were faithful, look here, higher is where God put them. Like with Joseph. Joseph went down into Egypt, then he went down into the dungeon, and when God was ready, one step and he was up to second in command to the king of Egypt. And so we see Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, God exalts them. And then Satan comes and tries to destroy them, but they will not be moved. And the result, they're exalted even higher. It's beautiful to see the way our God works. And so, in the story of Daniel, we get an idea of the way things develop on the world in the last days. These lessons from Daniel are types and illustrations of last day events. So God help us that we might learn these lessons and take them to heart. Because the same faithfulness of these young men is the same degree of faithfulness that will be required of God's people in a similar situation in our day. And these stories are there to help us to be prepared for it. So, this is where we have come to the end of our study of Daniel chapter 3 and to the end of our time for this evening. And we have been going for an hour and a half, so I'm not going to encourage us to stay too long. But if anybody has any final word, we can go ahead before we have our closing prayer.